voice. Seems so official. So welcome to everybody that's here. Thanks for joining us on, kind of a sunny day. It's District 2 Community Conversation. I think most of you are probably Orcasonians, if that's a real word. I think I make that up. There's a website. So I'm Tanya Williamson. I am the Outreach Volunteer Coordinator for the Land Bank. And we've got with us tonight Sandy Friel. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so you can see all the faces. Orcas Commissioner Sandy Friel. Unfortunately, our second commissioner, Brian Weiss, is out on vacation, so lucky him. Hopefully he's in the sunshine somewhere. And so we've got a brief format tonight. Director Lincoln Borman will give us a little update about the evolution of stewardship, and then we'll turn it over to Peter Guiazet, who is the Orcas Preserve steward. And tonight we're doing it a little differently than we did last year. Last year we did it's called a webinar format, and the public wasn't able to interact. We couldn't see our faces. It was just names and a list on the side. And so we had some feedback from commissioners as well as members of the public. We'd like to see you and have more of a town hall interaction. So hopefully if anyone has questions or when you're ready to comment, you will turn your screen on. We'd love to see what you look like and who you are. And speaking to that, because I have multiple boxes or faces out here, if you would please raise your hand. If you have a question or comment, it's at the bottom of your screen where it says reactions. Just click on that. And then there's a line that says raise hand. That then puts your Zoom face up in the corner for me, so I'll know that you're there, and I'll be able to go down the list and keep track of everyone. So hopefully everyone gets a chance to speak. And I think that's everything on my list. So I will hand it over to Lincoln, pretending I'm handing it over.
Great, thanks, Tanya. I'm going to share my screen here. And we're going to go through a few things. So first thing, just an acknowledgement that we reside on and care for the ancestral lands and waters of the Coast Salish people who have stewarded and called this place home since time immemorial. And we honor inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights that have been passed down from generation to generation. So tonight, our theme is going to be evolution of the Land Bank Stewardship Program. And I'm going to kick this off. I think that the starting point really is in the origin of the program and what's happened over time, particularly with acquisitions and leading into how the changes in our acquisition strategy have resulted in changes in our stewardship program. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that'll be our starting place. So this is our mandate. We always want to start there just to show people how broad it is and what we're trying to accomplish. So there are lots of variables in there. I think you can really boil these down to four basic things that we're all about. One is ecosystem integrity, where we're managing or trying to protect nature and the way it functions and keep that functioning healthy. Rural character and landscapes, that really goes back to the origin of the program, where it was very much about preserving the way this place has been and not letting it change too much. So thinking about what it might have been like to be here 50, 60 years ago, and just trying to retain some of that. Community health is another important component, and that's really tied back to the fact that having natural areas is something that comes across really as very important when you're looking at community health and health benefits. Just having those natural areas, having places for people to go, even if they're not actively exercising, it's an important thing. More and more in the literature, we see a reference to that. And lastly, agricultural sustainability. So our starting point in 1990 really had a strong emphasis on acquisition of conservation easements. And that's where we purchased rights from private property owners to prevent development. That's the basic idea behind a conservation easement, but the property remains in private ownership. And conservation easements are really good tools in certain ways. So they do protect views and rural character. They're cheaper to purchase than buying a property outright generally, and less expensive to manage because they remain in private ownership and we monitor them annually, but the private owner continues to manage the property. However, they've got drawbacks. They're complicated. Everyone is different. They look very different from one another. Reluctance of owners to partner is another issue when the program started. The idea that some of these old island families were going to take government on as a partner in their property was just hard to overcome. They're very limited in terms of proactive management. Conservation easements are very good at preventing bad things from happening on property, but not so good at prompting good things to happen. It's just kind of a difficult tool to make that work. There's also generally no public access on conservation easements, and they're subject to legal challenges. And we've certainly seen this with subsequent owners of conservation easements who buy a property and may decide that they just don't like some of the details of the easement, and we find ourselves going to court with them. So it's not always less expensive to have conservation easements than it is to have own property outright. More than that, though, I think as the time has changed, the islands have changed quite a bit. There's been a fair amount of development, and residents really are wanting more places to go, and the county does not have much public land by comparison to other Western Washington counties. You can see that in this slide, that really we are last in Western Washington, and certainly way behind some of the mainland counties. So we've got a lot more work to do in terms of trying to provide people with places to go and areas that are conserved. This slide really gives you the sense of how things have changed over time with our acquisition program. With the 1990s, seeing a lot of acreage in conservation easement, much less so in preserves. And then that flipping in 2000, the 2000s, that decade, largely because of the acquisition of Turtleback, which remains our largest preserve at over 1,600 acres. 2010s, the percentage of preserves versus conservation easement increases, and then again in the 2020s. So now we've got a significant amount of property that we're managing as preserve, as well as those conservation easement acres. And this is what it looks like. We've got 49 conservation easements on 7 islands. And generally those easements are in working farms or working forests, shorelines, wetlands, a lot of different features really. And we also have 38 preserves at this time, with 29 being open to the public, or more than 76%. I always have to throw this in here because it does come up often. The question of what the impact is on your taxes of the land bank owning real estate. And the answer is not a whole lot, quite frankly. The reason for that is that the taxable value of real estate in San Juan County is huge. It's over $9.5 billion. Whereas the taxable value of land bank preserves is less than 40 million. Even though we own quite a bit of acreage, the reason that value is so low is because a lot of what we've purchased has been in designated forest land or other preferred tax classifications where people have been paying very, very reduced taxes, or were previously in other government ownership, something like the school trust lands that the Department of Natural Resources owned. In any case, what that all means is that the taxable value of our land is less than 1/2 of 1% of the total taxable value. And San Juan County does have the lowest average tax rate in the state at $7.11 per $1,000 in value. So if you lived in Island County and you had a property of the same value, you'd pay 25% more in property taxes. In Whitman County, it would be nearly double. But if you did take our properties, all of our preserves, and put them on the market and sell them off and recoup some of that taxable value, this is what it would mean. Basically, if you keep the overall amount of property taxes the same, you would save maybe $15 on a $500,000 property. Slightly more complicated than that, but that's the general idea. All right, that's the end of my little aside on taxable value. Going back to our main theme and looking at, in this slide, our 10-year stewardship and management fund expenditures. This tells you a pretty clear story of what's been happening over the last 10 years, that as we've acquired more property, we're spending a lot more on stewardship. That's for a variety of reasons. In some cases, it's providing infrastructure for the public to access properties, parking areas, trails, restrooms, things like that. But also we're starting to do more active management, less just simple caretaking, and more actually managing for specific things. And that's a lot of what Peter's going to get into tonight. So on Orcas Island and on Waldron, this is the picture for land bank preserves and conservation easements. You can see we've got quite a lot collected across the landscape there. And of our preserves, 8 of them are open to the public out of 13. The others are not open for a variety of reasons. Access issues are really the chief one, but also some of them are ecologically sensitive. And so while we may be opening some of these, we won't be opening all of them. In any case, 8 out of 13 is pretty good. So I'm going to stop here and just turn it over to Peter to take on the task of talking about evolution of stewardship over time.
Give me one moment to get my screen shared properly. Oops. It never works quite like it does in advance. Okay. So hi everybody. Nice to see you here, and I'm glad we're recording it so the masses can watch this later. So yeah, I joined the land bank in 2018 as the Orcas Preserve Steward. And basically I'll pick up where Lincoln off, keeping with the evolution of stewardship theme. And I'll attempt to explain how I believe our work has shifted over time and then some possible reasons for that. Also provide a brief update on some of the work we're doing currently on Orcas, and then we'll hopefully kick off the conversation part, which should be a lot more interesting. So you've met Tanya and Lincoln already. I wanted to just kind of run through land bank staff so you can meet everyone else. We've got Aaron Rock managing our main office and operations with all that entails. Amanda and Doug are the preserve stewards on Lopez and Orcas. Erin, who you see on the call here, is our stewardship coordinator. She monitors conservation easements, drafts management plans, and takes on a variety of special projects. Eliza oversees the Salish Seeds Nursery. She also does ecological assessments and assists with project planning. Charlie coordinates ag activities and helps monitor conservation easements across the county. He also helps with stewardship on San Juan. We've got Jacob and Shauna, the field assistants on San Juan. Kayla Seaforth's former position, the Orcas field assistant, is currently vacant, just being advertised now. So we'll fill that soon. And then last but not least, we've got Margot, who's working at the Salish Seeds Nursery as well. And then we also just hired Sarah DeRoy and Mary Gropp as part-time seasonal positions on Lopez and Orcas. So very happy to have Mary with us for a while. So while this focuses on Orcas, we're pretty cohesive team, and we help each other out across all of our work. So back to Lincoln's comments about evolving stewardship and being more active in management of land. In my view, the land bank's critical role is really protecting natural landscapes that provide ecosystem services and preventing those from being developed through easement or purchase. But if you really have been on the Orcas preserves lately, you've probably noticed kind of an uptick in active management, weed management, forest thinning, planting, for example. This shift to more active management has been pretty gradual, but it appears to align with public expectations, at least based on recent feedback we've received from the public. It's also consistent with the broader trend among nearly 1,300 or so land trusts across the country. There's just generally been a trend towards more active management as organizations evolve and the amount of land in ownership or protection increases. I've watched it just in my short career, a number of land trusts in the Northwest shifting towards active management. Probably a lot of reasons for this. I believe we're generally more aware of the interconnectedness of systems and the decline of systems. Even in my short time on the island, I've talked to a number of people who've commented about seeing species disappear from favorite spots just in the last few decades. We're seeing weed populations expand rapidly. Washington has lost at least 30% of its wetlands. I suspect it's more in San Juan County. We're seeing decreasing summertime stream flows. And I think a lot of folks are just really beginning to make the connection between protecting headwaters, protecting wetlands, and preserving drinking water, and even the presence or the existence of any native fish or amphibians. I think that's really kind of starting to resonate with people. Following the rise of the industrial ag and forestry complex, I think most of us came to look at benign neglect of protected areas as kind of a welcome alternative to destruction that we were seeing elsewhere. But I think more recently we've begun to see how those practices disrupted natural processes, and that those systems really aren't recovering or won't recover without a lot of intervention on our part. So I think that's led to kind of a gradual normalization of active land management for reasons other than resource extraction, and even a demand for it, I think, by the public. I think it's a cultural shift in a way, and it seems especially evident when people hiking on turtleback to relax thank me for working on forest thinning with a noisy chainsaw. I think people are just kind of welcoming that management. And then climate change, seems to be really another major driver. It's creating a sense of urgency to try to manage resources towards greater resiliency. And people are noticing dying cedars. They're noticing the increasing fire risk. And then lastly, we're seeing increasing local capacity for land management in the form of Island Conservation Corps crews, contractors like Rain Shadow Consulting and Harvey Logging, and there's a small company called Oso Habitat Service. These are all, making it possible to scale up our work. This is the so-called green economy or restoration economy at work in the county, and the land bank's playing an increasing role in supporting it. Planting native species has really become the norm in stewarding natural areas. Eliza Habegger started the Salish Seeds Project to help address the limited availability of native plants in the islands, particularly appropriate native species. And now staff and volunteers collect seeds from wild populations throughout the county and grow them at the small nursery at the Red Mill Farm Preserve on San Juan. And by propagating plants for land bank preserves, the project's really playing an important role in efforts to enhance or restore local biodiversity. It's also, it also provides plants to partner organizations as well as a small quantity to the public via periodic plant sales, which are seemingly increasingly popular. And then in the last 3 years alone, we've planted over 30,000 wildflower plugs and bulbs from the nursery, along with 30 pounds of native seed just here on Orcas. During that same time, we've supplemented those plantings with about 14,000 bare root plants in private nurseries. With climate change kind of bearing down on us, we're taking a hard look at forested preserves on Orcas. We completed the Turtleback Forest Assessment in 2021, and we'll be doing assessments on 6 other Orcas preserves this year. By assessing the current conditions and determining what work needs to happen and where, we can prioritize our management planning and our activities to hopefully make them more resilient and also enhance the habitat at the same time, in the face of what's going to be a future with wetter winters and drier, hotter summers. We kicked off 3 small forest management demonstration projects on Turtleback this year and are close to finishing up that work. Those projects are in partnership with the Conservation District and Rain Shadow Consulting, using grant funds from DNR. Basically, we're reducing tree densities on about 2.5 acres, making a little fuel break along about 600 feet of road, and then removing competing conifers from about 6.5 acres of oak woodland and oak and fir woodland. A secondary goal of all this was to provide preserve users with kind of a view into forest health and fire risk reduction practices, basically in anticipation of increasing the pace and the scale of that kind of work going down the road. Turtleback's really the reason that I came to join the land bank. I mean, it's the main reason, and there are a lot of other good ones, but since it's purchased jointly in 2006 with the Preservation Trust, the land bank's done a lot of work doing the initial access projects, trails and parking lots, and did a lot of work on this, particularly on the south slope, to enhance Gary oak habitat, basically pushing back encroaching conifers. We've ramped up our planting efforts over the last several years and are currently doing the forest demonstration project I mentioned and getting into a landscape scale restoration grant. Basically, it's a multi-partner project that's focused on Gary oak habitat enhancement, mostly on the south slope again. And then to guide our activities over the next decade or more, we're putting the finishing touches on a major update to the Preserve Stewardship and Management Plan, and I'll talk about that next here. The original plan, the 2008 plan, set the stage for general stewardship and public access, and our updated plan draft is going out for a 30-day public comment period at the end of the week, Friday. Our overarching goal is to promote healthy, resilient forests for the species there that depend on them. As part of this, we're going to replace many of the mountain's 29 undersized culverts. This will help improve conveyance through the roads and sediment transport, and hopefully will put an end to the annual road washouts. We will begin to thin high density conifer stands more broadly, increasing down wood and standing wood where appropriate. We'll also add some of this wood to stream channels to help slow the flow and reduce the scour that's caused by these increasingly powerful winter storms. We're going to implement targeted roadside fuels reduction to reduce the risk of catastrophic fire and basically make those fires more manageable, I guess, when they happen. And we'll continue removing competing conifers from Gary Oak habitats in our planting efforts that we're doing now. To enhance the low intensity recreational opportunities, we're proposing to develop a trail for those with limited mobility at the south entrance. We also aim to redesign the south parking lot, which will make it accommodate a few more vehicles and also just make it a lot easier to get in and out of. We're hoping to remove a steep eroding section of the southern access road and then to widen the nearby Morning Ridge Trail. We also want to add a new pedestrian-only trail within the area added to the preserve in 2020. And those culvert replacements I mentioned are also going to help a lot with the general trail and road infrastructure. And then finally, we're going to hold public meetings to explore the possibility of limited hunting on the preserve to help maintain a healthy deer population and promote biodiversity. All these things are subject to public comment, so please keep an eye out for this week's press release if you're interested in reviewing the plan. Over to the 186-acre Caufelt Farm Preserve, probably the land bank's flagship agricultural property. It's part of roughly 500 acres of farmland on 10 preserves and over 1,300 acres of conservation easements across 20 privately owned farms. It presents together, all this presents about 11.5% of the active ag land in the county. Caufelt keeps us hopping, keeps us running to the commission for budget revisions. At long last, we're nearing the end of a multi-step planning process that began in 2019. That'll culminate this year with the selection of a long-term lessee, and those proposals are due June 1st. We're kind of launching into another phase of infrastructure investment, including an extensive electrical upgrade project this year. He's planned for this year. And then we're also trying to complete a trail feasibility assessment to determine whether the conceptual perimeter trail around part of the preserve that we identified in the management plan is actually buildable. Over at Coho Preserve near Olga, we're continuing our incremental progress towards using grant funds to buy additional flow for native fish from senior water rights holders. That's the only wild salmon population in San Juan County, and we want to do what we can to protect it. We're also doing ongoing planting there along the creek and in the forest, and continuing to engage with Jenny DeGroot, a local consultant who's doing fish and flow monitoring for the land bank. Generally trying to do what we can to sustain healthy forest and stream habitat. Over to Judd Cove, 11.5-acre preserve with a legacy of altered stream flow and erosion problems. Otherwise, a really great little piece of property. And in an effort to improve conditions there, we secured a grant to restore part of the shoreline that was hardened during the previous period as a log dump operation. And then pending permitting and available funding, we're going to try to improve the stream function and the quality of the water flowing into Judd Cove by replacing a couple of key culverts. We've also done planting there, and if we're able to finish that stream work, we will then plant along the stream and kind of eliminate the need for regular mowing down there. I've been focusing mostly here on ecological things, but I also wanted to mention that we spend a lot of time and energy maintaining trails, mowing, weed whacking, picking up trash, repairing fences, fixing leaks, doing other mundane tasks. Some of this requires regulatory permits. Some of it requires contracts. It all is quite time consuming. Some of these photos here, we've got a recent gate installation at Feller's Pond Preserve, hazard tree management over at Crescent Beach, annual Turtleback Road repairs from the washouts from undersized culverts, little boardwalk up at Coho Preserve, the replacement of the large Turtleback culvert on the south side of the mountain this year, signage, electrical work over at Toffelt. So lots of little projects. And finally, we really do a lot of partnerships. Here we've got the Conservation District and DNR on site visits. These collaborations really enhance and facilitate some of our work. And we're also able to work with a number of volunteers, thanks in large part to Tanya's work. Here we've got Keith Jones collecting acorns, folks planting on Turtleback, picking up trash at Crescent Beach, and doing planting over at Coho. So that's a pretty fun part of the job. I'm happy to wrap up my monologue here. I'll confess that I spent a fair amount of time wondering what the public thinks about our day-to-day management and activities on the preserve. So I'm grateful for a chance to hear your thoughts on any of that or any questions you might have. I found myself fearing an awkward silence, so I made a little word cloud of some ideas kicking around in my head to get gears turning. Thanks so much for listening. I think I'll use this, stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Peter. I liked your word cloud.
My pleasure.
I thought it was just me and Aaron that made those. That's awesome.
I do word clouds sometimes.
Oh, well, look, you've already generated questions. So Darcy, you had your hand up. Why don't you go ahead? Thank you.
Hi, well, first of all, just a huge thank you for your work. It's just really nice to know that it's being done and that people are taking care of the land and that there are ideas and processes in place to be able to increase the amount of protected land up here. Couple of questions that occurred to me in the process of your talk. One was Lincoln's had that graph, the bar graph showing the increasing cost of management, but I wasn't sure if that was a cost, if that was just total cost as the amount of acres being managed increased, or if that was a per acre increase. Is the cost per acre increasing or is it remaining the same? That's one question. And then I also just wanted to ask if you guys could tell me anything about what can or has been done to help the cedars that are clearly suffering from the drought, and also if there's anything that can be done to help the madronas from the that are suffering from the, I guess it's a fungus or something that's affecting them.
Well, I'll take the first question, or at least the first part of the first question. That chart really showed just overall costs and how it's increased. It's not really cost per acre. I will say, and part of that is, we're doing work projects that are really kind of where acreage isn't really terribly determinant of the overall cost. If we have to do a public access infrastructure project, that can be similar on a small preserve or a large preserve. But I will say that as we get more into active management and we start doing more things like thinning overstocked forests, that cost per acre is definitely going to go up substantially.
That's what I was wondering, yeah.
Guess I could take it from there, maybe. Yeah, so costs of everything are increasing dramatically, you know, labor costs and materials costs, but we are also actively pursuing grant revenues, you know, to fund a lot of this work. So in my experience, management costs per acre and in general have just risen dramatically over the last 15, 20 years. And I think that trend will continue, but I think there's also a lot of money out there to fund this kind of work. So, and then, you know, regarding the cedars, you know, I'm not a tree physiologist or a forester really, but, you know, what's happening with the cedars is the evapotranspiration, you know, is happening basically faster than they can pull water in. So there's cavitation happening, you know, air bubbles that are getting into the trees. And, you know, sadly, except for in north-facing, very wet draws, I mean, cedars are not going to be with us forever here. They're going to fade out along with a number of other species. Madronas, depending on who you talk to, and I believe this, are probably going to fare well in climate change. The fungus notwithstanding, I think the conditions could favor Madrona here in the long term. We'll certainly favor oaks and other species as well, particularly more southern species or species in drier areas. But yeah, cedars, sadly, are probably it's going to continue along painful decline here.
Peter, Janet, you have your hand up.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I'm just so thankful for the land bank and all it does. And I want to thank you for your leadership in land management, specifically the wildfire risk reduction and forest health enhancement projects. I'm going to follow your good example, and Carson and crew will work on my 5 acres later this year. Wanted to ask, have you seen deer dying on the land bank properties recently? I heard it was ongoing.
I haven't personally seen any recently. I mean, I've noticed a dramatic change in the vegetation this year, really. I mean, there's so many things are flowering that haven't flowered or at least haven't flowered for long, and they're getting through their, you know, they're actually continuing through their cycles. So, you know, the deer population will probably recover gradually over time, but it's a dramatic change out there. And I haven't seen or smelled any dead deer lately. I don't know about folks on other islands, but I've also only seen 4 deer across the road this whole year here. So.
Yeah, it's felt like that on my land. The wildflowers are amazing.
Yeah.
But Sandy's has been reported 2 dead deer. Is that right, Sandy? Recently? When?
Unmute myself. No, I just had to unmute myself. He reported this. I didn't know he was reporting these things. We are
it's a rumor.
Yeah, so on our street, definitely where we are, I can smell a dead deer in the woods. There's definitely at least one. And then farther up our road where he hikes the dog, he's pretty sure there's another one, because it's a pretty strong odor that's lasting for a long time. So, and at the same time, he saw a buck and a pregnant doe on the road. So.
Yeah, I don't think we're done with that hemorrhagic fever just yet, but there are a lot of questions about what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, thank you.
Sandy.
I wanted to go back to Darcy's question and ask Peter, is there anything that he knows of that can be done for the madronas that have this fungus?
I don't know. I mean, fumigation perhaps, but it seems maybe unwarranted. I don't know if Aaron or Chris or anyone else might know anything on that, but yeah, it seems like a natural occurring thing, and I think potentially as things get drier, it might become less of an issue, but I don't really know. I would just be speculating. I am speculating.
I think all I've heard is speculation as well. I've heard thinning, but I also see Sam Martin on the call, who has a strong ecological background. So if we want to go further, we could ask around. I've asked and haven't heard anything that is confirming that there's a specific treatment.
It's a periodic, like a cyclical thing, right? So someone said that it happened again. It happened like 17 years ago, and that every 16 or 17 years it comes through. But I don't know if that was a legitimate source.
Maybe we'll tab that to get some more research on.
Yeah.
Do a posting.
Samantha shared in the chat, she doesn't know of any solutions for the madrona. So I guess we don't know. To keep track of the cyclical piece. There's a question. Is there any update on Glenwood? I don't know who would like to field that one.
We'll let Lincoln start with that.
I'll take that one. So the Glenwood property, I think you're all familiar with. If people want to see, I can throw up a map here, but it is under contract to the Preservation Trust. We are having another appraisal done because the contract price is $6.5 million, which is more than we'd hoped to pay, but the best we could do at this point. So we're doing an appraisal to see whether this is a realistic price. Frankly, we're expecting to get that in next week. If that really verifies what we hope as a good price for the property, then we are going to have to go back to the commission and to the council with a budget amendment, because we had only budgeted a certain amount for the property, and we'll have to increase that. So really stay tuned. We'll know more next week. If we're going to go forward with it, then we'll be doing a budget amendment, which will come to the Land Bank Commission at the May 20th meeting. And the contract basically sets closing at toward the end of June, but we've got a number of hoops to jump through between now and then. And the main one is just this question of where we are and the price of it, but it's under contract. Fingers crossed, it'll all come together.
Great. Anyone else out in the ether? Questions or comments?
I got a little tidbit. I was out at Killebrew Lake the other day and I saw a fresh beaver sign. Either the beaver population is maybe growing slightly or they're moving around, but it's kind of cool.
Or both.
Or both, yeah.
Or both. Janet, you have your hand up.
I have a magazine, environmental magazine, that had a whole issue about wildfire, and it said that Smokey the bear should be replaced with Smokey the beaver, because beavers help prevent wildfires.
Good.
So maybe we can share that with people so they'll look kindly upon beavers.
What magazine is that, Janet?
It's Bay Nature from San Francisco Bay Area. I gave a copy to Peter.
Okay.
In fact, I have a whole bunch of copies I bought just because I want to influence people about wildfire risk reduction.
Darcy.
Yeah, this is just another sort of out of curiosity. When you say turtleback, does that include the portion of turtle head that was donated recently? Is that?
That's
I
managed.
knew that some portion of that was donated to somebody, and I thought that it was the land bank, and so I didn't know if that was included. When you say turtleback, do you mean that whole, the whole, all of it?
Ecologically, yes, but ownership-wise, turtle head and turtle neck are owned and managed by the Preservation Trust. And
which is not you guys.
But yeah, no, it's not us. But we did do the forest assessment jointly, so that forest assessment extended on to turtle head and turtle neck.
The area that was donated most recently back in 2020 was actually in the very southern part of Turtleback, going down to Massacre Bay. So that's definitely part of Turtleback. That's 35 acres there. But yeah, the other piece going over the neck and the head are owned by the Preservation Trust.
Could you, maybe this is a stupid question, but just to follow up, maybe explain the relationship between you guys and the Preservation Trust? I don't understand, maybe, I just don't really understand the difference. And
sure.
it's not a stupid question.
Yeah, well, that's not, no, it's not a stupid question. There's always a lot of confusion about who does what and what we are. And at a basic level, we're part of county government, and the Preservation Trust is a private nonprofit. And we partnered with them on a lot of projects now, but Turtleback was our first really big one and remains our biggest one. The way it's arranged for Turtleback proper is that the land bank owns the underlying fee to the property, and the Preservation Trust owns a conservation easement on it. And then they've got ownership of the head and the neck without really our involvement. However, one of the things they did when we purchased the property originally was raise, it was $1 million at the outset for a stewardship fund, which they contribute toward managing Turtleback. So we make use of that, they make use of that. That fund has actually grown quite a bit. So it's a great resource to have, but we partner pretty well. So it's sometimes they're bringing crews onto the mountain to do a project, or we're doing the same, or we're doing other things. It's pretty interactive. I don't know, Peter, if you want to elaborate on that.
No, that sounds good. I put in a request each year to the Preservation Trust to tap into that stewardship endowment to fund some of the work that we're doing with these various work crews. We also have our own budget, and I hope to bring in millions.
You should do it like this: millions.
Millions. Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, we are starting, I think, to see the kind of beginnings of grant money being made available for landscape restoration projects. And we did get, in partnership with some other organizations, a grant, or it's, well, not come through the door yet, but it will be, to do some restoration projects, one on Turtleback and one over here on San Juan on Mount Grant. And we're anticipating that's really just the beginning. So we expect to see a lot more funding available for those kinds of projects.
Sandy.
I just wanted to add to the answer Darcy's question about the difference between the two is so as a nonprofit, the Preservation Trust does fundraising. That's where they get their funds. But the land bank is funded by a 1% real estate tax at the time of purchasing of property. So I didn't know. That's good to know.
Thank you.
Any other burning questions? Janet.
Oh, I'd like to know a little bit more about the quantity of down tree trunks, logs that are sort of optimal in a landscape.
That is an excellent question. I think that it varies so much on so many factors, how dry a site is, what the fire risk is generally. And in some places you can get away with a lot of wood on the ground and have, negligible fire risk. And in other places you have to be very careful with that. So I think on Turtleback, generally on the north side where it's moisture, you could have more wood on the ground, on the south side less. But even on each side, there are draws that are moisture and other areas that are more exposed. So we're going to make those kinds of decisions, zone by zone as we go through, and try to leave enough to, feel like we're providing good habitat, but not elevating fire risk. And people other than myself will be involved in those decisions. And then, also try to leave wood standing as well, because it's provides such good bird habitat, insect habitat. So I think it's a very heterogeneous landscape, lots of different pockets of soil and different levels of moisture and shading and drying in the summer.
Yeah, thank you. That makes total sense. Got to have good judgment and expertise.
I'm wondering if folks on the call, it's not so much a land bank issue, but and somebody may have to correct me, but tomorrow is an all islands Zoom like this, a virtual town hall for the sustainable tourism and management plan. Did I get that one right finally? So I don't know if folks have signed up for that, but I'd be happy to include that in a follow-up email with you. April 28th, which is tomorrow night, is the all islands, and then each island has 2 more island specific Zoom meetings to sign up for as well. So we talked about that in the other couple community conversations, so you don't want to forget that. And we also, I'm hoping we'll pull it off again this year. Kayla was such a big catalyst for our Orca Recovery Days, but those are usually in October, and it's a big planting at Turtleback. A lot of the plugs that are grown at the Salish Seeds Project Nursery from Eliza that Peter mentioned earlier. Maybe we'll have extras. I'm not sure, depends on what he has planned for this year. But if you haven't already signed up for our newsletter, you could just scroll to the bottom of our any web page, and there's a little spot where you sign up for the newsletter, put in your email. And hopefully we don't end up in your spam folder. It's always a interesting process.
We'll definitely have another Orca Recovery Day event on Turtleback this year. And Tad Somerville, who was on the call earlier, I'm going to ask him if I can come collect acorns again on his property. He has his property and Linda Henry and Pam Lowe's property next door. Collectively, that's probably the best oak woodland in the whole county right there. It's just it's really pretty neat. And we've collected quite a few things there.
Making a note. Darcy, hand up.
Sorry, I could probably generate questions ad nauseum. You'll have to cut me off. One thing that has occurred to me is I just watched this documentary about soil regeneration being a method of drawing CO2 down and sequestering it in the soil as a way of also creating wetter microclimates. And I'm wondering if that, with all of this, the agricultural land that you guys have now, if a project like that might help to alleviate some of the drought symptoms that we have and potentially help the cedar in general, like just in general, help with the drought conditions that we've had, decrease the wildfire possibilities, et cetera.
Well, that's pretty hard to say whether we could influence the overall climate, but certainly whatever you do will help at the microclimate level. And we are working on doing more regenerative agriculture projects, really across the board. It's been kind of a tough row to hoe, pardon the pun. But as we're working with lessees, you kind of have to work with who you've got. And I think we're now making some progress in getting some farmers out there who are much more interested in these kinds of things and taking them on. And we're doing some research projects with WSU and others. So slowly but surely, I do think that the forests that we have and how we manage them will make probably more difference just because of the sheer acreage that we're talking about affecting microclimate. So if you can thin stems so they're healthier and you have more organic material on the ground, that's going to enable you to retain more water, more soil moisture, and that will certainly affect those microclimates. So the more we can do to keep our forests healthy, the better off we're going to be.
Janet.
I don't know if I should mention this, but I found out Opal has 28 acres of this forest that must be from like 1900 vintage. Beautiful old cedars, healthy Douglas firs, alders. And they want to put 4 units per acre affordable housing on it. And I want to find some way to swap it with another piece of land and save this really amazing forest. It's off of Bartell Road and north side of Orcas. So their land acknowledgement says they're going to be sustainable. And I called them out on that at their annual meeting. So making trouble here.
Mary, did you have a comment for that?
I do have a comment. I'm thinking about, I listened the other evening, Washington Native Plant Society had a really interesting interview with a man named Jerry Franklin. Some of you might know of him. He's probably in his 80s and he's been a forester forever. And so he knows the forest really deeply. And one thing he said was we should not, in our West Side forest, we should not cut any more, absolutely any more mature or old growth forests from a climate change perspective. He is just adamant about that. So he's with you. I should share, Jen, and I'll share at least with you and Peter that link to that talk. It was really interesting. Another thing, if I may go back to a different topic, the fire and the forest health, he talked about a project he was participating in or heading up in Southern Oregon. Peter probably knows about it, where they were managing the forest and clearing it out and making it a healthy forest. And last year when those huge fires went through, he said everything was blackened all around from a helicopter and you could look down and see this one little green island. And it was really effective at, have you all heard about that? It was really effective at keeping the fire under control and that.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I mean, I have heard about some of that. I've also unfortunately heard of stories where they went to Great Lakes to thin a forest and then the whole thing burned up. So there's no guarantees. So much depends on so many factors, you know. But I think we're still learning a lot, and I agree with Lincoln that our forests are probably, you know, continuing to protect wetlands and preventing draining of wetlands and restoring wetlands, plus, you know, managing our forests better. I mean, I think about those streams on Turtleback. They all flow down into the lowlands. They're all cut down to bedrock, and you know, going through undersized culverts both on Turtleback and down in the lowland, and a lot of scouring going on. I mean, we can get those straightened out in my lifetime by putting a lot of wood in them, trapping sediment, you know, trapping moisture longer into the summer, and, you know, basically extending the base flow longer into each year, and it's totally doable. A lot of labor involved, but, you know.
Volunteers.
Andy.
I know I'm not supposed to be the one asking questions. I always seem to do this. Back to the forest management, when Darcy was mentioning about the soil health, do I remember, were you talking about biochar, doing something with biochar as we're thinning forests, working with rain shadow to create biochar and spread it for?
Question for me?
Yes, for you, Peter.
Yeah. You know, biochar, like a lot of things, you know, sort of promises to be everything to all people. It's challenging to make a biochar, except in areas where you have machine access and you can move material around easily. You know, what we're starting to do on Turtleback and other preserves is to do smaller, lower intensity fires that keep more material on the ground, smaller diameter brush, basically. So it burns off quickly. It doesn't heat up the soil quite so much, and it does leave a lot of charcoal. And the vegetation recovers more quickly because we're not sterilizing it deep into the ground. But, you know, true biochar production really is in low, flat areas where you're near a road and you can use kilns and then export that material to use in other places. So we're not doing much, if any, of that on Turtleback, just because, for the obvious reason that it's steep and hard to get around. But the alternative, what they're calling conservation burns, these small pile burning, they do seem a lot better than the traditional giant piles burn for hours.
Thanks.
.6:35. There's still time if anybody has more questions.
I know Sam is involved in some burning on Jones, and Chris Gadati on the call is involved in that too. I don't know if they want to get in on any of this, but hi, Sam.
Hey, sure, everyone. Hi. I have to apologize. I'm on this old laptop and it's kind of making a funny noise, so I hope it's not distracting. It needs to be retired. Yeah, Chris and I were just out on Jones, actually looking at the area that we burned, looking at deer exposures that are full of wildflowers, talking a lot about deer populations. I did want to mention one thing about the soil, and we were talking about it out there today, is that I think, well, in general with ecology, there's so many great questions that have been asked, but I just feel like it always depends. And there's really no blanket policy that you can take and say, this is what should be done. Because, you know, there's some areas that have zero soil are where you find the most diversity. We're doing some plant surveys in Moran State Park, and out in the balds, there's literally like growing out of the rocks are 12 native species. And then you go into the forest where the soil is deeper and we have a lot of overcrowded forests. The plant diversity, you know, it's like one plant. So I think you just have to, it really depends on your site. And I was just reviewing this paper that, a study that was done by Dave Peterson and somebody else, I can't remember who, but they looked at historical tree density of south-facing balds on Mount Constitution. And they basically found that historically, looking at like old growth trees, snags, stumps, it was on average 7 trees per hectare. So that's south-facing bald. So it's going to be different on the north. But just to kind of give an idea of how much more open our forests were historically. So not that we can go back to that, but just, you know, it really depends on what aspect you're on, what kind of site. But I just wanted to put a plug in for, we don't always want to build up the soil because sometimes, especially on rocky balds, you build up the soil and then unless you're keeping invasive species in check, they're all just going to march right in and can crowd out the delphiniums and the chickweed and the, you know, Oregon sunshine and all those forbs that can actually thrive in those environments. So I guess I would just say it always depends every time, like really depends on your site. But that wasn't your question, Peter. What were you asking? Something about fire?
Just wanted to hear from you.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm multitasking. Chris and I just got back from Jones like recently and yeah. And yeah, so, but speaking of deer, is there anything we can do as like Orcas community members that might be supportive of hunting on land bank property? Is there anything we can do to help garner support for that?
I think that this needs to be a county-wide conversation involving the terrestrial managers group, maybe convened by the terrestrial managers group. And I think, yes, be involved, hopefully, because definitely extends way beyond what we can do. You know, at best, we can open some portions of some of our preserves to you know, limited hunting, but then those are surrounded by a sea of private lands, small parcels in many cases, and it's going to take everybody getting involved in this to really make a viable long-term management dent in it, I think. I don't know if I answered your question, but hopefully somebody can convene that discussion sometime soon and keep it going.
But certainly, you know, with the turtleback management plan revision, there's opportunity to comment, and what, you know, anyone you can think of to get to comment on that, the more comments, the better, really.
Okay, yeah, I just want to be supportive of that measure, you know, especially just seeing the impacts on Jones, what we're able to get established when there isn't as much, you know, we're not going to get rid of deer altogether, but when we think about plants that are out there for the pollinators and what we're seeing just as a response from a decrease in the deer population in terms of plants, you know, that are actually able to bloom and hopefully go to seed this year. It's just, I feel like we're in this opportune window to kind of keep the population in check, or at least try to, for the good of the other species involved. I have just an interesting side note. Last week, I saw 3 camas patches that had been weed whacked by different, I think, landscape companies or people just weed whacking. It was 3 different properties. And I was thinking like, oh, we probably need to do some education. Maybe there are plants coming up this year that people just haven't even seen before. But it just struck me, it was literally like almost 3 days in a row, and I would see it, and you know, somebody just thought it was grass and it was weed whacked. So anyway, not sure exactly what to do, but maybe talk to your landscaping friends.
We need a don't whack the camas campaign.
Yeah. Well, somebody was talking about the No Mow May. I guess that's, I don't know what organization spearheads that, but No Mow May for the, yeah, all the pollinators.
Mowing is murder.
Yeah. That's great tidbits.
Sorry, I'm still here. My internet is unstable, so I had to go off video. I guess Lincoln's getting all the internet in the office right now.
You never know.
You never know. Sam, thank you so much for sharing and commenting. It was really great.
Yeah, I'd like to extend off your theme and how every area is different too in relation to fire. Mary had brought up just a story from Southern Oregon. And I think, as Peter said, there's a lot of different examples, and we're thinning to help our forest lands be more resilient if and when there is a fire. And that's pretty different from protecting your structure from fire. In Southern Oregon, there was a pretty large fire. There had been tens of millions of dollars that went into the forest land and thinning the forests around them. But the catastrophic fire was actually in the homes area. So a lot of that strategy had been protecting town from the forested watershed. But when it came down to it, it was a human start in town and the structures were lost. So there's a lot of different layers to thinking about, I think, how to protect human communities from that loss and how to protect our forest lands from detrimental exposure to that too. Just to add some complexity too, as we're trying to do the best we can to manage for a lot of different values.
Janet, I see your hands up.
Sorry, I'm talking so much, but I am really interested in the wildfire issues because our house in Berkeley almost burned down in the Oakland Hills fire storm, but the wind shifted. So when we came up here, I studied safety for structures too. And one of the first things to do is to change out the air vents. There's a vent that has a special coating on it. So it responds to temperature. At a certain temperature, the coating swells and blocks the airflow into, say, attic vents or soffit vents or vents into your basement. And that's supposed to be one of the ways that these wildfires spread through communities, is the embers get into these vents. And the brand I use is called Vulcan Vent. Anyway, I think we should let people know that this is a relatively inexpensive upgrade to help protect their structures.
Thank you. Anyone else? 15 minutes left. Darcy?
Well, I was just, I appreciated Sam's comment about how strategies have to be tailored to the location. But I wanted to clarify that the soil management aspect that I was talking about was specifically about agricultural soil. It wasn't about building up the soil in forests. And I just think it's an interesting thing. I don't know that much about it. I'm not a biologist, but what it sounded like was that just doing soil regeneration and on agricultural lands, not tilling the soil, but introducing more species variation and having livestock multi-use, right? Having livestock rotate through and graze on the land and that sort of thing was a way of drawing down. It changed the microclimate through drawing down CO2 from the atmosphere and sequestering it in the soil, and that allowed for it somehow actually led to more rainfall on a local level. And so I don't know that much about it. Maybe someone else can go into more detail on it, but it really, we do have a decent amount of agricultural land, especially on Orcas. And so I'm just wondering if there's, I know there's only so much that the land bank can do because we only have a certain amount of agricultural land, but I'm wondering if there's any, if anybody knows of any interest or people talking about that as a way of potentially affecting the local climate.
I mean, I'll just say that I think a lot of local farmers, people interested in farming and grazing, are talking about that, about not disturbing soils, not tilling, and then using different grazing techniques to have a lower impact on the soil, getting them in and out in a timely manner so they're not just hammering the soil and compacting it and overgrazing. So I think there's a lot of conversation about that. There's always more that we can do. There is a lot of overgrazed ground on this island and probably on the other islands as well. But yeah, people are learning and sharing that information. At least I see that spreading gradually.
Yeah, I know the San Juan Islands Conservation District has had put some information and done some seminars for demonstrations. And then you might also, if you had an interest, there's the San Juan Islands, the Ag Guild, the Agricultural Guild, and they might be able to point you towards some folks too if you wanted more information. That's going. And I can send you that information.
Sorry, Tanya. We are kind of hoping to model some of that on properties that we own. But you know, in the case of Caulfield, it's leased, at least in an interim basis. Now it will be leased long term eventually. But there was a grazing workshop there just the other day, so I think to the extent that we can, we're trying to encourage innovative thinking on our farmed properties.
Well, and I also know that the Conservation District had purchased a seed drill some years ago, and they've been working with farmers to try to increase the diversity. And then my friend Andrew Borner on Shaw has a private company, and he also has a seed drill. So I think there has been a push to, you know, increase the diversity of species in ag land and maybe plant some more perennials and really just try to build the carbon in the soil to retain more moisture, even if the climate doesn't change, but that there would be more organic matter. Darcy, was that a film called The Carbon Cowboys, or a little documentary that you watched by chance?
No, I've seen that one too. That was called something ground. I can't think of it right now. It's a longer one. Woody Harrelson is the narrator. It had one of the same people that was in the Carbon Cowboys. I used to use that when I taught environmental sociology. I used to use those shorter videos to introduce the ideas to my students. But I'll think of it. If I can find it, I'll put it in the chat. Although I don't seem to have the option to chat with everyone, only to Tanya. But I'll send it to Tanya if I can find it.
That would be great. I'd be happy to forward it along.
I think it's called Kiss the Ground. Does that sound familiar?
I think Darcy's muted.
We lost you.
Unstable internet. Well, I'll make a note, and I think Darcy will send it, but it can't be that hard. Oh, great. Well, Woody Harrelson, you mean, quick Google search, we'll find him. Are there any other comments or questions before we close? It's almost 7, but certainly it's been a great discussion. Lots of good ideas, some new ideas.
I appreciate all your thoughtful comments and questions about forests and forest health. That's nice to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Can I just say one more thing about forests while we're on the topic? Because I think it's a really interesting topic in the San Juan Islands. And I think Mary Gropp brought up the talk with Jerry Franklin, which unfortunately I didn't catch, but he was a professor of mine at UW. And I know he's a big champion of old growth forests. And there is a question of like how you define old growth. Is it over 100 years old, which would be a lot of trees here? Or is it 200, or is it a certain diameter? I think that has still not been well defined. So when we talk about old growth trees, it's a little tricky. And, you know, if you think about the cessation of indigenous burning, that's been over 100 years generally. So we're dealing with a lot more crowded forests, and some of that may contain older than 100 years old trees. So I think going back to the idea of it depends, and also considering the historical density of our forests and what we have now, which like in that paper was, at least on Mount Constitution, we've gone from 7 trees per hectare on average to like over 400 trees. It's a huge difference. So anyway, just thinking like it always depends. And I think what I love about ecology is it's so nuanced and it's so complex that there's really no, like not ever one answer. And so sometimes like for fire safety and for ecological diversity and forest health, and maybe even to like protect the cedars because they're stressed from too much competition, like actually cutting more trees is what we need to do, which is counterintuitive to what we've been told, but is I think a really big need in the islands because we don't have fire anymore. And Jerry Franklin, you know, has worked in a lot of like Olympic National Forest, forested areas, and maybe in Oregon. And the San Juans are just different. You know, we're drier, trees grow slower. The soils are really shallow and rocky. It's just, again, it like goes back to that, it depends. Like, so what people say you should do on the Olympic Peninsula, it doesn't always pertain here, you know? So yeah, there's not like an easy answer. I guess it's just always kind of complex, and it depends. And it depends on your objective too. Anyway, just wanted to leave with that complexity too. So pays to get to know a place, you know? Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Well, we're lucky you were on the call today, Samantha.
Oh, it's really nice to hear from all of you. Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate what the land bank does, and just all the property that you guys work to protect, and all the work that Peter's been doing on Turtleback is so great. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone that hasn't spoken, do you want to sneak in here in the last 5 minutes? Don't want to call anyone out. It's like you want to say anything. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone's time tonight and all the great conversation, and thanks for making the meeting worth it. I know there was some competition tonight. The Oak Woodlands, I think, who are one of our peers, one of our coworkers, Doug McCutcheon, or San Juan Island Preserve Steward, was taking part in, giving a presentation tonight. So I will send out a link, a reminder for tomorrow's meeting, and then and if anyone wants to register for the county. And with that, I'll say thank you and good night. There's some famous person that says something.
Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Matthew, for being here. Sharon, everybody, Sandy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good night.
Night all.
Bye.